Hello, and as I said, welcome to the New Israel Fund's first online program of 2026, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Idit Klein, and as of 8 weeks ago, I proudly joined the staff of the New Israel Fund as the Vice President for Public Engagement. I'm here with Miki Gitzin, our acting CEO, while our CEO, Daniel Sokach, is on sabbatical. Although Miki was the executive director of NIF Israel for over 8 years, he's new to his role as well here in the States. In fact, he just moved to Brooklyn in December with his husband and two young daughters. So we can welcome Miki to Brooklyn and to the US. So let me tell all of you a bit about how we're going to spend our time together today. First, Miki and I will each share a bit about our own journeys, how we got to this work at the New Israel Fund, what keeps us in this work, what keeps us energized and inspired despite the challenges. And then we'll move on to dive into NIF's plans and strategies for 2026 and beyond. We'll also have time for your questions at the end. So I've been saying in advance of today's program that Miki and I are two people who have both come out many times in our lives. And here we are doing so again today in a different way, this time in our New Israel Fund roles in our first public event for NIF here in the US. So thank you for being here today for this different coming out event of ours. So Miki, are we ready to begin?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. So as I shared, you have been with NIF and more broadly part of the social change movement in Israel for many years, far longer than I have, but you're still relatively new to this audience, which is primarily an American Jewish audience. So I'd love to start by you sharing with all of us what brings you to this work.
Thank you, Edith. It's really a privilege to be here. And, I'm going over the names and the people, and I've known for quite a while many of them, and it's really great to be here doing my new job. It's almost a non-question for me. What do I do at NIF, or what inspires me? I feel, as an Israeli, a person who wants to raise his daughters and family in Israel for the future, that there is no other way for me to be engaged or push towards Israel I want to raise my kids in, other than the world and the values and the grantees that NIF supports. I've been always a person of politically and socially engaged. And really the main reason I joined NIF was actually, I had two reasons. The first reason is that there is no other organization in my mind that actually encompasses in the same way all of our values. When I joined NIF, I didn't need to choose between my commitment to the struggle against the occupation, or the fight for democracy, for human rights, or LGBTQ rights. This idea that actually a full-on ideological place that actually is me, that's what brought me to NIF. But if I'm actually honest with this audience, I was 36, and I thought there is no way that anyone would allow me to be the executive director in Israel in that age with my experience. So I just, applied, and I ended up running this organization in Israel for 8.5 years, hopefully quite successfully. But that's another reason why I joined NIF. I didn't think I would do it. But, being more on the serious side of it, we're told many times that we need to choose sides. What are the things we leave at home when we fight a certain fight or certain struggle? And I think that in the current moment, both here in the US and definitely at home in Israel, it's very clear there is no one issue or one value or one thing that is more important than anything else. And being part of this movement building, think about issues on the broad strokes. It's what makes NIF, I think, a uniquely positioned organization that touch on so many of the core issues when it comes to Israel. But if I'm honest, when it comes to democracy at large in the world we live in. So that's what energizes me, and that's what makes me feel at home at NIF. I kind of want to ask you the same question, Idit. I've known your work at Keshet long before I joined NIF, I have to admit. You've been a leader in the Jewish world, in the LGBTQ world, and I feel that many of these people that are on a call with us know you. But one thing I actually did not know, that you actually started your career at NIF in Jerusalem, when we were still in Jerusalem at 21. So I'm kind of throwing the question back to you. What brought you back? What makes you feel at home at NIF?
Yeah, so it's a fun fact indeed that my very first job out of college was working for NIF in Jerusalem. So in many ways, all these years later, it does feel like a return home to me. And I have to say that I feel like in many ways my whole life has been a journey to and with the New Israel Fund. I was born in Tel Aviv, came to the States as a toddler, and although I grew up here, I grew up very much in an Israeli family and with a sense of connection and belonging in Israel that I didn't feel here. Um, Another key part of my journey that's very salient to this work is that as the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, I grew up from a very young age feeling that I had a responsibility, and that was a responsibility to work to create a better world. And yet, the truth is that until I was 16, I really didn't apply that sense of responsibility to Israel with a critical eye. And what happened when I was 16 was, in some ways, my first brush with the New Israel Fund through meeting Nomi Chazan. I was in Israel on a youth fellowship called the Bronfman Youth Fellowships, which brings together American Jewish teens from a range of political and religious backgrounds. And another fun or not so fun fact, if you believe it, the slot that I had was of the Likud supporting secular Israeli American. Well, that was until Nomi Chazan came to speak to our group. And it took about maybe 2.5 minutes of my hearing her speak about the injustices of the occupation and oppression experienced by Palestinian citizens of Israel and the many layers and dimensions of inequality in Israel and the gaps between what I thought Israel was and the truth of Israel's reality at the time, for my eyes to just, literally and figuratively fly open and for me to suddenly see so much that I hadn't seen before and understand so much that I hadn't understood before. So suffice it to say that I returned home to the States and to my parents, condemning the Likud party and no longer identifying with them. And my parents started lovingly saying, and if they're listening now, and I think they are, they will smile to recall how they started saying, well, I guess we can thank Edgar Bronfman and Nomi Chazan for turning our daughter into a leftist. And indeed they can. And that was the summer that I decided, well, when I graduate from college, I'm moving back to Israel and I'm working for Israeli-Palestinian peace. So I'm grateful to Nomi and grateful to NIF for funding the peace movement and really all of the movements working for a better Israel then and all the years since then and now. And the last piece I'll share, since you began with my time at Keshet, is that um, in between those years in my early to mid 20s when I was in Israel and now I started and built an organization called Keshet that works for LGBTQ equality and Jewish life. And one of really the gifts that is most precious to me from that time is the experience of going after goals that many people around us said could never be achieved. That's impossible. You're naive. What are you thinking? Yet we persisted and we kept persisting. Marriage equality is one good example. And then after we achieved the goal, we noticed that within really a very short number of years, we encountered people around us, often our kids, who had grown up only with that reality and therefore took that new reality entirely for granted. So that experience of going after what something is inconceivable and can never be achieved, yet persisting and achieving it, and then it just becomes the new reality. That's something that I'm bringing with me to my life at NIF because I certainly know that there are many people who say that you are naive. Peace can never be achieved. Israelis and Palestinians can never work together. But we know that another way is possible, and we know that it's not only possible, it's necessary, and it will happen. So, why don't we move at this point to the moment that we're in? We were just in the moments that brought us here, and now let's move to the moment that we're in, and to the heart of our work together at NIF. There's so much that is going on now that is profoundly painful, really heart-sickeningly painful here in the United States and in Israel, where our work is focused. We have the wounds of the war still open, a reckless and cruel government that seems to be bent on dismantling our democracy in Israel, a continued state of crisis in Gaza, dramatically increased violence in Palestinian communities in Israel, attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank by settlers and soldiers. Outside of Israel, here in the US and around the world, unprecedented levels of anti-Semitism for many of us in our lifetimes, rising authoritarianism in the United States. The list does not end. It can be so overwhelming, and the pull to get lost in despair is real. And yet we at NIF know that despair is not a strategy. It can never be a strategy. And we at NIF have a strategy to respond to the current reality and to build a better future. So Mickey, tell us what you are thinking and what we're talking about at NIF. How would you describe the moment that we're in now in Israeli society, what we're facing as a social change and pro-democracy sector, and how we're turning that into strategy for action?
Thank you, Edith. You know, people who know me know that that's where I'm getting, that's where I get excited, and that's where I'm getting putting my nerd head on, thinking about like the real true strategies that you can talk about when you know these kind of questions come. So the first thing to be said, we are in a very painful moment. In a very painful moment in the US, but definitely when you look at the Israeli society, I think that the level of division, the level of disagreements, the level of violence that we see within Israel and of course between Israelis and Palestinians are skyrocketing. I think that it's almost impossible to think anymore about one Israeli society. And some would say that we are on the verge to what would be considered even a civil war in certain ways. It doesn't have to be civil wars as we think within the American context, but I really see different people knowing, understanding a different reality. But it's actually more complex than that, because those different perspectives, realities, understanding of who we are is not split between, you know, East and West or North and South. It's actually dividing families. I can think of my own family in a way of a family that sees things completely differently. So this notion that there is no, even not one or two or three Israels that we're speaking about, many of them, makes the work much more complicated and hard. But if you want to push what for me the number one thing that needs to be tackled, or the core of the problem that we need to be thinking about, is the rise of Kahanism and Jewish supremacy, and that becoming a mainstream within Israeli society. I think that it's important to remind this group that it's not that those were not leftists who made the Kahana movement in Israel illegal. That was actually the same Likud party that you were representing back then, Idit, that was the one that passed a law that Kahana's group in Israel is a terror organization. Now we see the representatives of the same movement in the Knesset in the ministerial positions. And it has implications on the way we treat Palestinians within the state of Israel, and definitely it has implications on the way the state of Israel as a state allows and somehow pushes settler violence and military violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. This is from the same roots of the Kahanist perspective that makes liberal and pro-human rights work illegitimate within the Israeli framework. And I think that if there is one thing that needs to be clear, regardless of where you stand politically, in many ways, is this pushback against the notion of Kahanism and Jewish supremacy. Because if we touch upon this issue and connect it to the occupation and to democracy-related issues and to assault on the courts and so on, I think that that will be a significant push forward. So what NIF actually does need to do about it? First of all, I want to say something that it's should be probably clear to all of us. NIF is here, and I resonate a lot with what Idit has just said about the LGBT struggle. Many things that NIF has been working on for many years became mainstream, and now NIF does not need to handle it anymore the same way. Issues related to LGBTQ rights and women's rights and religious freedom and social justice elements that kind of like found themselves in the heart of the Israeli mainstream. But we are not there to serve the mainstream. We are there to push the mainstream forward. So we know that we are here for the long run. Not one action or one strategy will win the battle, but no, at the same time, not one thing or a point in which we loses the battle completely. We're here for the long run. And that's something that's important to understand when you talk about NIF. And the spaces in which we feel that we have the most important role to play are in spaces in which other funders or other organizations feel more uncomfortable touching upon. And when we talk about Israeli democracy, those are the things that we look upon. First of all, how do we strengthen and push forward the pro-democracy movement in Israel? Without a strong movement that has a clear story, clear narrative, ability to reach people, and actually get people into powerful positions in this Israeli system, none of the change we want to happen will happen. Second thing, which is extremely important, is protecting Israeli democracy. And many organizations protect Israeli democracy, but we mainly focus on our need to protect civil society and social activism and freedom of expression and the ability of Israeli society to push against the current government. And without protecting the ability of our grantees to do our work, will not see a democracy. Third element, which is extremely important, is our work around the occupation and Israeli-Palestinian relationship within Israeli context. We saw just before October 7th, a huge movement for democracy in Israel. One of the issues that was not part of this amazing movement is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And we at NIF know that without touching upon this issue, we'll never see true democracy, because there is no such thing as democracy within occupation. And the last thing, which is a major priority for NIF, of course, the Palestinian society within Israel. NIF has just launched a new program that touches upon strengthening and working on rights of civil rights of Palestinians and the issue of Palestinian civil society. So those are our priorities. The priorities do not change year after year, but reality changes year after year, and we have the capacity to answer the changing needs according to this reality. And when we look at 2026, we'll talk soon about what are the subjects that we are dealing with. But if we're looking at who we are, our values never change. We are here for peace, for all people in the region. We are here for equality. We are here for shared society. The programs or the issues we touch upon are the issues that I've just mentioned, that for us at NIF are the core subjects of the matter, and they can go from 3 to 5 years program kind of a thing. Democracy movement, peace and security, and Palestinian society within Israel. And of course, the changing reality influences the balance of our work. Where do we invest more? Where do we invest less? And why we do so? And I want to add another sentence, and I'll bring it back to you, Idit, is that NIF doesn't see itself only as a grant maker or only as an organization that builds capacities or only as a way for American Jews or international Jews to connect to Israel. We lead with our strategy, and our partners know our strategy and what we're trying to achieve on the ground, and we bring them along in order for us to know what we are trying to achieve with clear and measurable objectives for the future. And I think that reality today shows that what, exactly as you said it did, was thought just a few weeks ago as impossible can happen in real life. And I'm kind of like giving the cue for my next answers, but I don't know how many of you have followed the massive demonstration that was just on Saturday in Tel Aviv. A demonstration that dealt with the number one priority of the Palestinian society within Israel, which is crime and violence within their own communities. No one, including myself, thought that a Palestinian-led demonstration in the heart of Tel Aviv will bring to the streets of Tel Aviv more than 100,000 people. 50% at least of them were Jewish. Not Jews who speak on the stage, but Jews who stand down, under the stage, not speaking on the stage, listening to Palestinians speaking in Hebrew and Arabic in Tel Aviv. Those are realities that we can create only if we see, long term, what our goals are. And I think this is a really great example of something that no one would expect, but we have expected and we were able to support at the moment.
So that was a very dramatic and an inspiring moment from just this weekend, Mickey. And I know because we were in touch about it for much of the weekend, how much that kind of buoyed you and really lifted you up. But I'd love to hear, and I'm sure others listening to you, are wondering kind of, what has sustained you, or what are, what's one example, of, a story of the work that has sustained you and, kept you both anchored and energized throughout this time.
Yeah, that's always, one of the problems with working for NIF. There is never one story that makes it, to be the number one story of what we do. But I think that at the end of the day, the one examples that actually show me the importance of our work is where we don't only fund programs or think of programs, but actually we assess the field and build upon it. So, it's a bit of a long story, but I'll try to get really excited. 2 weeks ago, in all through the country, 700 locations through the country, we had in the education system of Israel what we call a democracy day, a place in which civil society organizations, leaders, and so on got to go into public schools and speak to the education system, teachers, and students about what does democracy mean. That could not have happened 3 years ago. And why is that? How this event came to be? About 4 years ago, a human rights organization, Breaking the Silence, came to us at NIF and told us, listen, we are not able to reach what's called in Israeli jargon pre-military academies, because the right wing keeps on bringing students and so on to see the settlements because they fund it. They fund buses to go to see the settlements and the settler story of the West Bank. And we are not capable of doing it because of funding, because of our relationship with the pre-military academy. So what NIF has done, heard the story, went to one of our grantees, which is a pre-military academy, told them, is that reality? Can you build a program and a plan in which human rights organizations, civil society organizations, and so on, have more access to the education system? And then that's the way we actually built what's called Hamigdalo, the lighthouse, a democracy education system that works not only with the pre-military academies today, but actually with education systems in local authorities, education system with youth movement, the education system of quite through all the entire country. And our ability to see the problem, to know who is the organization that we should approach in order to build this new system that can work, is really where NIF is its best, because our broad perspective allows us not only to see the problems, but also know who are the organizations, partners, thinkers that can do so. And as we did before, we're going to do it. We're going to do it again. You've been to this organization for a short while, but you know us for quite a while, as we've learned today. Do you have a story as such?
In fact, I do have a story. It's a very painful story, yet it's always where I turn, ironically or not, when I feel my sense of hope flagging at all. Maybe it's because of my family's history, of devastation and loss, and yet how I grew up still believing that my work for a just world could make a difference. But I always go back to the Bereaved Families Forum, which is an organization of what it sounds like. It's of families who are bereaved, both Israelis and Palestinians, who have lost people of lost family members to the quote other side, yet who reject that formulation of the sides and who refuse to be enemies. And I've just always been so powerfully moved, especially of the parents who have lost children. Um, I look at them and I think, you who have suffered the most unimaginable loss, and yet here you are, standing arm in arm, walking step by step, believing that together you will be the change and you are the change. And so for me, when I have those moments of feeling despairing, I think of those parents and then I think like, how dare you feel like you get to lose hope or you get to feel despair for even a moment. Look at them. And then, that puts me back on track.
Thank you, Edith. We speak when we talk about NIF many times about our work in Israel, but NIF, at least as we see it, has a major role within the American Jewish community. And in your new position, one of the big tasks that you took upon yourself is actually to lead this work of the New Israel Fund when it comes to the American Jewish community. And my question is like, what are your plans for 2026? How do you think about it? And also, what's our role when it comes to the American Jewish community? What's our message there?
Um, so I definitely have thoughts to offer. And, I also offer them with the humility of someone who, just started my ninth week at this organization, though it has been my entire life, as I said before. So I guess I have something to stand on. So look, I really see the work of public engagement at the New Israel Fund, at its heart as about, telling our story, which really means telling the many stories of the New Israel Fund and figuring out how to do so in a way that is spectacularly powerful, that engages and that keeps people engaged and inspires people. And that sometimes agitates people. Mickey, you said so beautifully in your interview with JTA recently, and we'll be sending out a link to this in the email after this event. You talked about our responsibility to meet people where they are. But not stay where they are. Meet people where they are and push them to be curious, push them to think, push them to consider growing in different directions. I'm not quoting you exactly, but I think I got the gist. So in the broadest terms, I would say that what guides me and all of us in the public engagement department is the real clarity that this work is holy and heroic and transformative, and it is happening every day. And so it's our job to amplify the voices of the people who are doing the work and making sure that their stories are known as widely as possible and inspire support. And then when I think specifically about, well, what are we doing here in the United States in terms of the impact on the American Jewish community? There's inspiring support of the New Israel Fund and of our work in Israel and of our work around all of the issues that we're talking about. But what's the impact on the American Jewish community? And I really believe that in telling the stories of the people who are working for a more just Israel, we are giving American Jews a reason for hope. We are giving American Jews a reason to believe still that a just Israel is possible. So many American Jews today feel a sense that their connection with Israel is frayed or close to being severed or fully ruptured. So, in my mind, we will be successful at the New Israel Fund in the United States if we succeed in building the sturdiest, most inviting bridge that enables people to rebuild that connection, to rebuild that what is broken, so that NIF can be an antidote to that sense of despair, to that loss of hope, and so that NIF can be the hope. That that's what I'm thinking 8 weeks in. So we'll see a little down the line how things evolve.
Okay, thank you.
So let's move now, Mickey, with your permission, to our specific plans for 2026, our specific strategies, and if you can also include, I'm sure many people are waiting to hear, how are we thinking about the upcoming elections in Israel, not the United States?
Oh, I could try to. No, I'm going to stick to Israel. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think that this question is extremely important because we're not here only to offer hope to people. We are here to offer actual work to people. We're not only about creating hope. We at the New Israel Fund are fully connected and grounded at what's possible, in the field, as you say in Hebrew, bashetach. And it's extremely important because we know at the New Israel Fund that we have partners on the ground to do the work. And change is possible not because we are dreaming about different reality, or as you heard me earlier, don't see things as they are. We understand how complex and hard things are, and then we go and see what are the things that can or need to be changed for the short term or to the long term. And now for your answers for your question about 2026. So as I said, NIF's big priorities do not change every year. We will always, in the coming years, we'll always work on building the pro-democracy movement that will push back against the neo-fascist tendencies of Israel. We'll always protect Israeli democracy. We'll always be clear on the occupation and how you bring a different future and how to oppose on the ground, devastating realities in the West Bank, and we'll always support Palestinian civil society. But within this framework, the next year is a very, very interesting and complex year to be looking at. The 2026 is not only about the election itself. The election year, the fact that we are looking at an election year changes completely things that we thought in the past were irrelevant. So of course, when we look at elections, we think about voting rights and who is allowed to vote, who is not, how certain groups within Israeli society, including the coalition government, will try to prevent people from their voting rights. Who's going to be allowed to be elected? Who is not going to be allowed to be elected? But it's also the year in which we know that the level of violence and the level of pushback from the right wing against certain communities, certain protest movement, and so on, will be the most brutal ones. We already see it on the ground in Israel. Just this week, the Israeli Supreme Court judge or President Aaron Barak was attacked by a thug named Mordechai David in Tel Aviv, a 91 years person who is the Holocaust survivor that devoted his life to Israel, was physically attacked by this guy, because one of the things they're trying to do, because election is this year, is actually try to get more and more brutal or violent attacks between what do they call liberals and right wingers or Kahanis, to call them as you want. So we will need to think how we actually answer this potential violence. And this violence also will not only occur within the Jewish community, definitely will try to undermine or prevent from Arab citizens of Israel to vote using the same kind of violence. And it's not only that. Bezalel Smotrich knows that this is an election year, and he wants to bring back results on the ground. So you'll see an increase of support or an increase of settler violence on the West Bank because it's an election year. So you can't think of the election year only through the lens of elections. It influences or impacts all spaces of the work of NIF. So you need to ensure the rights of people to vote, but you also need to ensure that people are free and open and have the ability to express their opinions publicly and protest and so on. And you need to make sure that the level of violence against Palestinians in the West Bank are not in the rise because they're trying to prove or show something on the ground, making sure that everyone understands that I truly believe that settler violence today in the West Bank is not only settler violence, it is a government-led strategy using youth in order to create violence and actually push Palestinians out of the West Bank, specifically Area C. So as you see, it touches upon all the issues that I just said are NIF priorities: protecting democracy, the ability to vote, the right to vote, and so on. Building the movement, putting a clear voice that pushes people into into voting, into action, and so on, and protecting the rights of Palestinians, in the West Bank and so on, because there is no doubt the political violence or the use of violence within the political sphere will be in the rise of an election year, as we already see it. So reality outside of it, outside of the NIF world changes or influences how we set our own priorities within the same framework of issues that we already have the expertise, the partners, and the ability to have a true impact on that. And we change as an organization. I think, Idit, if you told me 3 years ago that NIF would have ever supported protective presence in the West Bank, where people actually with their own bodies protect Palestinians, I would tell you that's not what NIF does. NIF goes to courts, NIF does, advocacy, NIF does other things. But when we see that certain ways or strategies that we've used for so many years do not work the same way, we also change with them. While the values are still the same, but the way we approach certain things are different. So I think that that's in general how I see it, at least this year, within the framework of our regular work, great grantees and partners, and strategy at the moment.
Thank you, Mickey. To everyone on this call, in maybe 3 or 4 minutes, we're going to move to your questions. So feel free to use the question and answer tool to share your questions. So Mickey, one last question for you before we go to our participant questions. So you just said, if someone had told you a couple of years ago that we'd be funding protective presence in the West Bank, you wouldn't have believed it. I would say the same around direct funding that we're doing in Gaza. You want to speak a bit about that, starting with the campaign from earlier to the grants that were just given more recently?
Yeah, thank you, Edith. I think it's because reality changes so fast. We kind of think that things we just immediately was one of our main focuses. I think that it's very clear as an identity of NIF to say who we are. We were one of the first organizations within the Jewish world that answered the needs of victims of October 7th. I personally was there on the ground, renting hotel rooms for people who had to flee their own homes from Ofakim and from the kibbutzim out there. It was very clear we addressed both the needs of the Jews living around there and the Bedouin community that suffered from it as well. But we were also the first Jewish organization internationally to fundraise and offer funding for WCK and other organizations that...
Mickey, what's WCK?
World Central Kitchen, sorry about that. I should have known better. World Central Kitchen, Clean Shelter, and other organizations that work on the ground in Gaza to provide them with help, with food, with medical support, because we knew that that's exactly who we are. We are the people who stand clearly post-October 7th, but also when we see the catastrophe that is happening in Gaza, we are not to be silent. And when I say we're not to be silent, it's not only the way we talk about things, the way we do things. And for us, providing help and assistance to these kind of organizations that have people on the ground was the right thing to do. And I'm proud to say that we sent to Gaza more than $3 million to support the humanitarian crisis of Gaza. So I think that if you want to see, what NIF is definitely this organization that can see both at the same time, because we believe in, people and humans, and it doesn't really matter if you're Jewish, if you're Palestinian, if you're in need, we are addressing it. And I want to touch another thing which I think is important when it comes to that. We are an organization that has on our board and staff Jews and Palestinians working together. And that not only, the work that we do, it's also who we are and what's our identity. And, to share with you, it was not always an easy task to manage or run organizations as such, definitely in times post October 7th. And I think that NIF's community, both employees, board, and grantees, are much stronger now. And that, our values are much clearer. And despite a really hard time, being the manager in Israel, doing so, I think that that's something that I'll, on a personal level, I'll never forget. I really felt some points that I need to speak a different language, although I spoke Hebrew to all of them. But we in many ways overcame it, and I think we became stronger out of this kind of challenge. And I think that our Palestinian colleagues knew that we were supporting humanitarian help in Gaza, and our Jewish friends and colleagues knew that we were there post October 7th, and it made us a community of humanity, rather a community of Jews and Palestinians.
Thank you so much. All right, so let's move to your questions. Hopefully we'll have time to get through a few of them. So Mickey, there's a question about, sorry, find it. There is a question about plans to connect Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel politically. And our participant says, would you agree that there is virtually no chance that there will be a majority for progress in the Knesset without inclusion of the Arab parties? What will NIF's role be?
I'll start by saying we're a 501c3 organization.
Yes.
We work outside of the clear political work, so we don't push towards any parties or supporting any political direction. Having said that, I want to say, I think that the chances for a Jewish Arab party in this current moment is low chance. I think that we definitely need to push, as a community, not as an Israel fund, as much as possible for the inclusion of Arab parties within any political future of the state of Israel. There is no future for the political center left in Israel without collaboration with Arab parties. And I think that also for, ideologically, but also practically, that's where we should see our future. And I think there is a good chance, despite everything we see and people saying stuff about it, that we'll see a powerful political response coming from the Palestinian community because of this horrific government, meaning more and more people would go to vote. And at the same time, at least part of the Arab parties will be able to be included if elections resulted in a different way than the ultra-nationalist right-wing government of Netanyahu.
So somewhat relatedly, can you speak to NIF's stance related to the nation-state law now, plans for the future, and maybe summarize what the nation-state law is for anyone who isn't familiar with it?
So I'll say a word. The nation-state law is basically what's called in the Israeli framework a basic law. This is our constitutional framework that defines Israel as the state of the Jewish people, period, without any reference to the Palestinian minority in it, and while trying to undermine the role of Palestinians or the equality for Palestinians, kind of like in opposition to the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel that actually stated clearly that full equality has to be ensured within the State of Israel. So it's always interesting to say about the nation-state law. NIF has a very strong position opposing to the nation-state law. We still stand firmly believing and knowing that this law should just be canceled. No other solution is possible. And personally, I have to say, this is one of these times that I was personally attacked by Prime Minister Netanyahu, accusing me for believing that the state of Israel should be a state for all of its citizens and not only for the Jewish citizens of it, with my picture on his Facebook page and brutal attack by his followers. And I think NIF has never been more clear and more proud to oppose this legislation. And I think that that would be definitely one of the things that we will need to put on the agenda of any future government.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. I know there are many more, but that is one of hopefully many reasons that will keep you coming back for our future events. So, Mickey, can you speak to how American Jews can be meaningful partners this year, and I trust for many years into the future will be needed?
I think that historically Israel has been always a partnership project, not only about between American Jews, but diaspora Jews and citizens of Israel, Palestinians and Jews. And I think that if you like it or not, diaspora Jews was always very influential in the direction that the state of Israel has gone. I think that one of the things that we don't see enough is liberal alliance or progressive alliance when it comes to the future of the state of Israel. And I think that that's the direction I would like us to be leading. I think we need, for the future of the Jewish people, for the future of the state of Israel, to kind of like form a liberal pro-democracy alliance of Jews, because this alliance is something that can actually reassure for the future of the state of Israel. Because of course, we all know it, the way the state of Israel influences or impacts how Jews feel at the current moment is enormous. And I want to say it's not only, and here I'll not be doing my job if I didn't say it, it's not only by supporting organizations like the New Israel Fund that actually pushes on the ground our values, but it's also about speaking up and being able to bring in different voice within the Jewish community, because I think that many of the establishment organizations that we all know, in some respect more, in some respect less, I think, are not bringing this diverse perception of what Israel should be. And it's time for us, the majority of Israelis and Jews who think differently about the future of Israel, to speak up, because our voice matters and actually can make a major influence when it comes to actions on the ground, definitely while supporting causes that are aligned with our values.
Thank you. So I think with that in mind, I think I'd love us to close, Miki, with each going back to share another story. It didn't need to be the best story before, and it doesn't need to be the best story now. But I think all of us are, on both sides of the ocean, are so nourished by every glimpse of courage, every glimpse of impact, every glimpse of someone pushing against the tide and pushing through. Um, so maybe I can share first, since you didn't know this question was coming now, and I did. But you're always ready. But I'll go first, and then you'll go.
Go.
So the story that comes to mind for me at this moment is a story that started with a question, a very profound question. Um, So when October 7th happened, it of course was a devastating blow to the peace movement in Israel. But the truth is the peace movement had really been in decline. It for well over 2 decades it was in decline, and it was not the source of pride and sense of transformative potential that so many of us felt it had, when I was in my 20s and just starting out at NIF. And after October 7th, that decline felt especially stark and acute. And when most of the Israeli public was still reeling in shock from the attacks of the 7th, the settler movement sprang into action and held a massive rally calling for annexation and of Gaza, and calling for expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza. And there were members of Knesset present and other prominent public figures present. And many people watched this in horrific, stunned silence. But there was one person Tami Yakira, who works for the New Israel Fund, who watched this, and she posed a simple, profound question. She said, "What happened to the peace movement? And what future are we offering our children?" So she was looking at this as an activist, as a leader, and also as a mother, looking at her children and thinking, I want my children to grow up with the same kind of optimism and humanity and belief in peace that I grew up with. So, how can that happen? So, from that simple question came action and came a movement. Tommy, with the support of the New Israel Fund, created a wide coalition of peace and anti-occupation groups. Peace Now, Standing Together, Women Wage Peace, the Bereaved Families Forum, alongside members of Knesset, artists, and thousands of grassroots activists. And that became the It's Time initiative, which today stands strong with over 80 organizations united around a shared message. It's time for peace, it's time for diplomacy, and it is time to revitalize the Israeli peace camp. They held an extraordinary gathering back in July 2024 in Tel Aviv. When they held their second gathering, which was even larger, it was held in the same space as that settler gathering post October 7th, except this time within the walls of that space. The voices were not calling for mutual destruction. The voices were calling for rebuilding and for reaching together for peace. So I look to the work of Tami Yakira and now the work of this whole movement that has been created as what is possible sometimes from anguish, what is possible when one reaches through that despair and reaches towards others to build power, to grow courage, and to figure out how we can find others who believe in peace and continue to build that power moving forward. So that's something I've been thinking about a lot. How about you, Mickey?
Yeah, I'm thinking, telling the story of Tami, I'm thinking how she was frustrated, like when she saw this settlers gathering in Biennale in Jerusalem, and me was like, and me trying kind of like to calm her down. Don't worry about like, but actually this energy was really significant, and without her getting angry and motivated by anger and kind of like hope, it wouldn't have happened. You know, I usually think big question, strategy, and so on, but I actually want to tell the story, which is for me probably the most moving story since I've joined the NIF. I don't think I even ever told this publicly. Post October 7th, we as a peace movement in Israel knew quite a lot of people that were affected, by October 7th. Many of the people of the kibbutzim around Gaza were people that we knew. I knew them for many, many kinds of work. Probably the most prominent of them was Vivian Silver, Zichrona Livracha. Vivian Silver was a peace activist, one of the founders of AJIK, of Argo&T, that works on Arab-Jewish relationship in the Negev. She was one of the founders of Women Wage Peace. She was a board member of the New Israel Fund and B'Tselem. And she symbolizes more than anything else hope and the ability to make change. And post October 7th, we didn't know if she's alive or she was kidnapped into Gaza until very sadly, I was actually in the States. I remember the room in which I was when we were told that Vivian died, was burned alive. And the most touching moment for me was when her sons, Chen and Jonathan, called me during their Shiva. It was in November, asking me to partner with NIF as an organization that symbolizes more her, commitment to human rights, peace, women's rights, in order to create a prize honoring her name, feeling that's the right home for the Vivian Silver Award. I never spoke to Jonathan before. I didn't know him. And I felt the responsibility and the trust that is given me as the leader of NIF in Israel. And those moments show you that despite everything NIF has gone through, and me personally have gone through, with tackles with the government, attacks, and so on, the right people, the people that we care about, the people that share our values, know that we are there when they need us. And our values shine loud and clear. And we will be those, not the only ones. Ajik have built amazing things to commemorate her, that have the privilege to work with the family to commemorate Vivian Silver, Zichronah Livracha. And I'll never forget, by the way, leave aside the prize that when I saw in Gaza, huge tent of a soup kitchen serving kids with the name Vivian Silver on it in the heart of Gaza. That to show that, it's all about people. So that's my that's definitely the most moving or emotional story that I can tell about my NIF experiences in the last few years.
Thank you for sharing that, Mickey, and thank you for bringing Vivian Silver's memory into this space. We honor her every day with our work at the New Israel Fund. So I want to thank you, Mickey, for being in conversation with me and for your American Jewish premiere. I want to thank the many hundreds of you who joined us today. Know that we will continue to gather online, to share, to educate, perhaps to agitate, to be in conversation with you on a monthly basis throughout this year. So please join us again. We'll also be having in-person public events. And before we part, I want to note that it feels very fitting that today is Tu B'Shvat, known as the Jewish New Year of the Trees, the day that marks when the sap starts flowing in the trees in Israel. Now, I know that I'm looking outside my windows in Boston and I see snow and slush and frozen ground. And I imagine that that is the case for many of you, whether literally or figuratively, as you look out upon what we see here in the US and in many parts of the world. But for me, Tu B'Shvat is always a reminder that despite what it looks like around us, somewhere, the sap is flowing through the trees. So as we part, I offer to all of us, to you, Mickey, and to myself, and to everybody listening, the perhaps radical invitation that wherever you are, imagine the day that what is frozen now will be green and blossoming and thriving. Tu B'Shvat Sameach. Thank you for being with us today.
Toda rabba, Idit. It was really a pleasure to be in conversation with you. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Take care.
Bye-bye.